Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Teodora and today I have a very special guest with me. It's my lovely teacher, who is not my teacher anymore this year, but used to be in my first year, Miss Emma Prins. She has taught two courses for me last year. It was Political Challenges and International Cooperation in the EU and Beyond. So I thought it would be nice to discuss today about the differences between the educational system in Moldova and the Netherlands, and some other stuff about the artificial intelligence and internet work with international students. But I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Okay. I mean, I already got a nice introduction, but so my name is Emma Prins, and I am a lecturer at European Studies at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. And I'm teaching mainly the politics courses and the EU-related courses. Our bachelor also has more business courses. I stay far away from that, but the courses on EU law, the European Union, and just politics in general, those are the ones I teach, like the ones I taught you in the first year. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, great. So this podcast is recorded as part of a bigger campaign, which is called Our Voice, Our Future. It's a campaign which was launched by the European External Action Service in the year 2022 as part of this big campaign, thanks to the United Nations General Assembly that happened last year, but it's still ongoing. So basically, I thought that you would be the best person to have for this podcast because the topics and the issues that we address as part of the Our Voice, Our Future leaders, let's say, or influencers, definitely relates a lot to the European studies. I feel like in the past 2 years, we've talked a lot about sustainability, maybe a bit too much.
Yeah.
In a lot of areas. And I feel like, yes, it's strongly connected. So maybe for the beginning, I could ask you maybe what area of sustainability is the most closer to your heart, maybe? Or...
Wow. Well, I'm not teaching the courses that focus a lot on sustainability. But I do know we deal a lot with the Green Deal, which I think is extremely important right now. And also specifically being from the Netherlands, we had quite an important portfolio in the commission, like our commissioner Frans Timmermans, who is leaving now. And actually we're supposed to hear today whether our former minister, is Wopke Hoekstra is going to take over. So of course the Green Deal is quite an important part, but I think that sustainability is not just about the environment, it's also about making a policy sustainable in terms of effectiveness and that it can last very long. And I think that is in general also a very important part that we often forget about. And that is also the part that I feel quite connected to, because then you get into the question of what makes a policy effective, which I find very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel like when you first hear the word sustainability, the first thing that comes to your mind is environment. But actually, sustainability is much more than just the environment or climate change, which is, of course, still a big part of it. But sustainability is also about quality education, about peace and prosperity, about institutions, and so much more. Zero hunger, for example. And
Exactly.
so now transitioning to the topic that is about education, I would like to discuss a bit about the differences between the educational system in a country which is so developed from this point of view, and how, my experience maybe with being a high school student and a middle school student in Moldova, and maybe discuss a bit about the priorities, because I've also felt a big switch when I started university here.
Yeah. Okay, but of course, university is also different, I guess, than high school in general. But I'm guessing probably the university system in Moldova is also different than in the Netherlands. Yeah. Well, I personally studied in the Netherlands, Estonia, and in Romania. So those are kind of the only points I can compare to. But then you can bring in your view from Moldova as well. But yeah, what was the question?
So maybe, okay, let's start with something a bit more simple. Did you enjoy going to school?
I did, yeah.
Okay, and what was your favorite subject?
So what level of school are we talking about?
I mean, let's say high school. I think that's maybe the point when you're most like aware of what is happening.
True. What did I enjoy most? I really enjoyed history, but I would say I think a lot of people can relate that it depends on your teacher, whether you like this course or
That's
not.
true.
But I really liked history. And we also had a course that I didn't realize I liked until I started studying it in my bachelor. And I was like, oh, I really enjoy this. And I should have not taken it for granted at high school level. But at high school, we have a course that is focused on, it's kind of like society studies. And it's very much like about the government and how that works and societal issues, which I didn't appreciate enough at the time. And later on, I realized that was my area. But sometimes because of your teacher, because you think you're not interested in something, you're not getting the full experience out of it. Unfortunately, yeah.
Yes, I definitely understand what you're talking about because I had, I think, a similar subject in school than the one that you're talking about, which we called like civic education, something like that.
Yeah.
And in essence, when you would think about what it would imply, is like, why is it important to vote? And maybe some basic knowledge about how politics work and the importance of some things, how to find a job, how to prepare for a job interview or things like that. Something that we actually do a lot here at Personal Leadership as part of our program. But I kind of missed it because the program was not really well developed, the curriculum in general, and the teachers, unfortunately, it wasn't exactly the subject that students would take seriously. And of course, the teachers understood that, so they wouldn't really actually put in a lot of effort to prove it to us that it's actually very important.
Yeah, usually the topics and the skills that are very important are also often the ones where students are not that motivated to actually learn it. Unfortunately, like they want to talk about, like that's the nice thing about teaching politics. Often students want to debate and discuss and talk about ongoing issues, but they like it much less when we talk about what motivates you in life. How do you study? How do you apply for jobs? How do you do research and write a paper? Like often students find that quite boring, but those are often the most important skills that you take with you after bachelor. Which in the end, I don't think one is more important than the other necessarily, but I think those are very, very useful, yet often not appreciated that much by the students. Yeah.
Okay. I also wanted to ask you to explain to me and the people that are listening to this podcast right now an interesting thing about how education works in the Netherlands. That's something that has been explained to me probably like at least 4 times, but I'm still not fully getting it.
Yeah.
And it's with how does high school work with all the levels, HAVO, or how are they called?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think then we also need to talk about the university system after to link it to each other. So at the end of primary school, so usually when you're around 12 years old, you do a test to see what your level is. So it's a general test on several subjects. And it's actually right now a lot of research is coming out that it's not that representative of like how smart you actually are. But we already divide kids into different levels based on that. And then you can go to a level at high school depending on the outcome of the test. I'm wondering if we're going to get rid of this in the future because also what the teacher says about you has a weight as well, but not as much as the test, I believe. And then at high school, it's a bit complicated, but we have different levels and it's sometimes you can switch one level, but it's really hard to switch between levels. And then you have, for example, a 4-year program. That's the shortest way you can go, where you have a lot more practical focus and courses are taught very differently with different kind of expectations. Then you have more of the middle level called HAVO, with which you can go to University of Applied Science. And then you have the other level that is VWO and Gymnasium. It doesn't really matter what it's called. And they're very similar to the middle one, but then you have a little bit of a more complex level. You go a bit more deeper in theoretical, and at the highest level, you also need to take either Greek or Latin. Yeah. And the shortest you can do is 4 years. Then you have the middle level is 5 years, if I'm saying this correctly, and then 6 years for. I might have to fact check this but I think it's 4, 5, and 6 years. It's been a while for me. And then after the 6-year one, you can go straight to academic or research university. If you've done the HAVO level, the 5-year one, then you can go only to applied science university, or you can do sometimes some kind of pre-program that helps you enroll and then go to research universities. But then also the question comes in between the difference of research universities and of applied science. Did you know about this before you came here?
Actually, no.
Yeah. This is quite a unique system that we have. We don't just have one level of university. We have the applied science universities, which in the Dutch language, we don't even call universities. We call them, it would translate to high schools, which doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. But I think only Belgium has it too, and Germany has a sort of equivalent with their Fachhochschule, but it's not really the same. And we in Dutch only refer to research and academic universities as universities, mm-hmm. not universities of applied sciences, which it is actually. It is a university, and especially in English, so don't let anyone tell you that it's not. But because it's so unique, often our international students also don't know about it and they come here.
Yeah.
The difference is, more or less, very simplified, is that applied science, as the name says, is very supposed to be very applied education. So you get courses in how to do presentations, research skills, oral speaking skills, writing skills, how to write a paper. You get less theory, a bit less reading, a lot of guidance also with courses like personal leadership to get you to where you need to be. And also, this is the main focus, is that it's very career oriented. So there's going to be assignments where you work together with actual assignment providers, people who work in the field. You do less exams and more assignments that you would do for a provider, like write a proposal for something or a business plan, which is much less likely to have at an academic or research university, where you're let much more free, usually have less courses. You might go a bit deeper, but also it is much more theoretical. You're left more independently, so you have to figure out yourself how to write a paper, how to give a presentation. So we give a lot of guidance. They give less guidance, but you can see it as more free, more theoretical, more academic. There's a stronger focus on theoretical exams and academic papers. Mm-hmm. And academic research, and less on assignments from the working fields like we have. And also, don't let anyone tell you that one is better than the other. I just think it completely depends on the area you want to go in and the system that you prefer. For some people, applied science is a lot better. Others, research academic is a lot better. The only problem is that almost all of our masters are offered at research academic level, and they don't always let someone in with an applied science bachelor. For some degrees, it makes sense to have an applied science master, like pedagogy or something more technical where it's completely based on practical experience. But most masters, like in our field of European studies, international relations, public administration, they require you to have a bachelor from a research university, or if you have applied science degree, once in a while they make an exception, or quite often actually you can still do a pre-master. But that means you have to study more than someone who went to a 3-year bachelor at a research university, whereas our bachelors tend to be 4 years. And also, for example, we make our students go abroad at our program. We make our students do an internship, which is very, very common. And research universities sometimes have the option to do so, but it's not very likely that they make you do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting and very complex.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's actually a really nice overview for the students or future students actually, that are currently listening to this. because there is actually a big tendency of people coming from Moldova, Romania, from this part of Europe for their studies to the Netherlands. And it's something that you don't really hear about a lot. So
True.
yes, that's a really nice overview. Okay, now if we move to a different topic, this is something that's close to my heart, maybe. I've done a lot of volunteering in my life.
Yes.
I think I started volunteering when I was like 13 or 14, and it hasn't stopped. It just never stops. Of course, when I was in Moldova, really proactive and involved, and it was easier for me to get around because I knew all the opportunities. And once you get kind of into one organization, then it's easier for you to reach to other opportunities that are there for you. So, speaking of volunteering, NGOs work, opportunities for youth in the Netherlands. I've seen that it's not that many actual programs or projects for people for young people to volunteer, and not even like a tendency from my peers, the Dutch people that I've met, to have a volunteering activity. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I haven't met a lot of people, or I haven't encountered any programs. But my explanation behind it was that maybe it's just that in the Netherlands it's easier to actually make your voice heard or have an impact, like as a young person. So there is maybe not such a big necessity for volunteers or for NGOs that are specifically focusing on these areas of youth participation. Or is it just that I haven't met them?
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm now realizing that we don't necessarily have a big volunteering culture, which some places have more than that we do. And I mean, I'm sure there are several reasons for that. I mean, one reason is also that it's harder to do it if you're not Dutch. So if you have international friends, I mean, to be honest, in my experience, I feel like the international people sometimes even volunteer more than the Dutch people I know, but it is easier to find something if you're Dutch, I'm guessing. But I must say that we have less, like, for example, if I compare it to you in Moldova, we have less NGOs set up like you have, which might have something to do with it. And we do make our students basically do some volunteering work as well, to get some working experience. And what I think is important to know, but doesn't necessarily explain this phenomenon, that the difference also here with other cultures, is that in order to do volunteering, you do need to be already in sometimes a little bit of a privileged position. I'm not like I know lots of people who were not born privileged and are still volunteering because they understand the need for it. But also, if you do it, for example, instead of working, instead of a job, but you're doing something for free, you can only do that if you already have the necessary resources. I don't think that explains why I don't feel it being a big part of Dutch culture. And it also depends, I think, if you have a bit of if it's in the culture that you have such a strong community feeling and a collectivism over individualism, that might also have something to do with it. But it's true, I feel like in comparison to some other countries and cultures, it's not extremely common for young people to volunteer. And I must say there are some interesting ones that relate also to the topic of today. Like, for example, we have a National Youth Council, which I don't think nowadays is limited to only Dutch people anymore, but that's something to check. And they have different areas where they focus on, like sustainability, the United Nations, and the EU. And I used to be part of a group that would volunteer basically to, on the one hand, lobby towards the government on education on the EU. But the largest part of what we did was spread awareness on the EU and give guest lectures at high schools. So that is also something that you can do, but I would say that there's not that much knowledge about the options of volunteering amongst young people. I think the opportunities are probably there, but there needs to be more awareness of what they can do and where to find it.
Okay, that sounds interesting. It's actually kind of related to the next topic that I wanted to discuss, which is generally how do you feel about the importance of involving young people in the decision-making process, and how much would you say that the youth is involved? Is there maybe even like the council that you were talking about, the National Youth Council?
Yeah.
Does it actually have some type of legitimacy, or is it like they can only give advice?
Yeah, no formal decision-making power, just
Okay.
influence. And in general, I mean, civil society has quite a big impact on our decision-making process, and young people are a very important part of civil society. But of course, I'm speaking also from my bubble of young people. And I would say that we do, like a lot of countries, are dealing with that we call it that our countries turning gray, and that the majority of like the largest group demographically are people who are older than 50, 60. So in terms of actual decision-making power, young people don't hold that much power over it. However, I do think we're very active in civil society, and civil society is not separate from our decision-making process at all. So it could be better. I don't think officially there's a formal way of involving, in the Netherlands at least, young people into the decision-making, but we are quite active in the civil sphere, in civil society.
But do you know by any chance what was maybe the rate of young people being present at the elections?
The last elections?
Yeah.
Or I don't know by heart, but I do know that our young people don't necessarily often vote too much, and with not the last European elections, but the elections before that, so that must have been 2014, the young people, so age 18 to 23 or 25, was showing up the least. Like they had the lowest turnout. And might have to do with knowledge on the EU. It was a little bit better for the last 2019 elections, and now I'm hoping next year, 2024, is going to be a big difference. But in general, often young people are not that motivated to vote, and we're also a smaller group. I mean, I'm not part of that group anymore, but we're also a smaller group in comparison to the older age groups. So there is maybe some misrepresentation there. Yeah.
But do you think that maybe the schools should play a role in educating on how important or how the processes work? Maybe the reason for the low number of young people being present at the voting sections during elections is because they're not very well informed on how the processes work. Could that be a reason?
True. Yeah, I noticed that most people don't know. We teach it in school to a small extent, but I feel like with anything in education, we always need to try to bring it closer to people. As in, when I was studying some aspects of the government in high school, I did also not realize how it affected me. And I think there could be a stronger focus on, first of all, teaching it, and second of all, teaching it alongside a demonstration of the importance in your daily life. Okay, the government works like this, so what? Well, it affects these kind of decisions. It affects the food you eat, the people you see around you, what you have access to, etc. Like, I think that's very important to have a clearer picture, especially when you're young, of how this affects your daily life. And part of that is also feeling a connection to it. So people tend to feel more of a connection to their government than they do, for example, with other elections, like EU elections. I think there's the lack of knowledge on the EU shows in the voter turnout. Yeah.
I was surprised that I can also vote for the local water board elections. And I was wondering, what do you think about this? Because for me, it was very weird, and I don't know how to feel about this. I actually fully agree with the fact that as a person who, like, for example, if I'm a resident of The Hague, then I should have the right to vote. But I believe that there should be a specific, maybe time requirement Because, for example, it happened that for me, I just moved to The Hague for a couple of months. I just moved to the Netherlands. It's a new country. I'm not entirely informed about how politics work, but still, I kind of have the power to decide something which might not affect me for the next 4 years, because I might stay even for less, or something that, I'm not entirely and fully informed about.
Yeah. Well, I think on paper, anyone is more or less entitled to vote who lives here legally. And I don't think you can restrict that based on how long they live there, or, there's lots of people who are registered somewhere but are, for example, studying abroad for a bit, and they keep their registration and they also have a say over it. And I think in general, just everyone should have the right to have a say over it if you live here. But what is a problem, I think, is that our elections are extremely Dutch-centered, even if it's elections where you can vote for if you're not Dutch. I think it affects everyone. Like, people also have to, for example, we're deciding on decisions relating to water. And non-Dutch people also have to pay the water tax. They also need access to water, but the information of which party wants what, tends to be only available in Dutch, and we have a lot of Czech websites where you can see, like, you do a test and check what party you would be aligned with. That tends to be also almost always in Dutch. So I think that if you give people the right to vote, you also you have a responsibility to also inform them what their options are.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I actually also did one of those tests, but it was also in Dutch.
Yeah.
So I had some of my classmates translate it to me. But I was curious, I don't know if you know about it, but are these tests tailored around what the parties represent on paper? Or is it also...
on paper.
Okay.
Yes, that's why I always tell people, like, you can do a test, but if you really want to be informed, like when someone asks me, like, how do I know what to vote for? Let's say if you really want to be informed, also look at what they vote at, because parties all the time do something differently than what they say they stand for.
Yeah. Which
Which partly has to do also with our system. You have to make compromises and form coalitions, etc. So that's always going to happen. But still, parties promise something and then actually they're going to do the exact opposite. So yeah, usually this is based on their party programs. And what sometimes parties do very smartly is that quite often there are statements there that you as a voter might not know anything about, so you just vote like neutral. Like usually with these checks, you can say, I agree, I don't agree, neutral. Sometimes these parties also, when they have an input over that, they just put neutral everywhere so that they come out as the perfect party for you, whereas actually you just both click neutral for a lot of the statements. So I would always say, don't just check out yourself what they have to say in their party platforms. Not every single party, but maybe the ones that show up and test for you, or the ones that seem to align just on paper. But also look at their voting behavior. Like that's really important, which I think is hardest to find if you're not a Dutch speaker. But it must be out there somewhere. So I would recommend it for anyone to also check that.
Okay, sounds interesting. But as a resident of a city, I think you can only vote for the local water board election, right? Or is there some other?
I think so. I'm not the best person to ask about this, but I also believe that for EU elections, if you are an EU citizen, but you live in another EU country, I should not say this wrong on this podcast, but I believe that you can choose whether to vote for your home country or to vote for your host country, basically, if you're from an EU country. I think you can choose where you want to be represented.
Okay. Maybe we can go a bit back.
Yeah.
Maybe you know about any examples of youth-led initiatives that had a great impact or success on some initiatives that the European Union had, or maybe they somehow, maybe they influenced the agenda for the EU?
Good question. Well, I know about like general citizens-led initiatives, but I don't know specifically about youth-led initiatives. Like I know I would have to look it up, but the citizens initiative that the EU has, if you get enough signatures from different countries, It's basically like a referendum, and then officials from the EU will listen to you if you get enough signatures, and then they can decide to start legislation based on that. So one of the examples is like the initiative, I believe it was on access to water, that it should be included in people's EU rights that they can have access to water everywhere, to clean drinking water, for example. And that was quite a famous citizens initiative. I don't know if there's one that is specifically by
I
young
think it
people.
was even actually voted, and it should actually enter into force soon. That even in Horeca, you should always they should always bring you drinking water to your table that is not billed.
Yeah, and I think that's the case now in some EU countries. I know that's the case under Dutch law, for example, but I don't know if it's the case under EU law yet or if that's coming. That's something to fact check. But not necessarily about EU legislation, but also about young initiatives. I mean, you've heard about the what is it? The so the European Youth.
Oh yeah.
Parliament simulation, right? Or what is it? A simulation?
The European Youth event, I think it was called.
Yeah. There's a lot of initiatives like that, or like the Youth Council that we have in the Netherlands that do have representatives. Like, for example, there's EU representatives who go to EU meetings and do talk to decision makers. There's UN representatives who go literally to New York and speak. So that is quite... I think there's quite a few examples of very successful youth movements and youth initiatives. But I think there could always be a stronger voice for young people, especially at the EU level or national level. Yeah.
Yes, even our campaign, Our Voice, Our Future, is also a really nice way to bring out and make the voices of the people through the whole world actually heard, because the participants and everyone is welcome to join the initiative no matter where you come from. Okay. Last year, we had a very interesting topic for the course. I mean, last year I generally enjoyed the public administration courses the most, which I miss kind of a lot right now. But in the second semester, we had a course, the international cooperation in the EU and beyond, and we had a very interesting topic for it, which I really enjoyed. We have talked about the 5 global issues. We had to write a paper about
yes.
which was definitely an experience and has broke a lot of hearts. So the 5 global issues that we discussed about is trade, development, environment, human rights, and security. And we focused a lot on the role of international organizations in fighting with these 5 global issues. And generally finding like smaller problems that come from these global issues. I remember that I had a very interesting topic about journalists under threat, and it was interesting for me to research more on it, and actually I found out a lot of new stuff. But let's discuss a bit about them generally.
Okay. What about it?
How do you think global issues should generally be addressed?
Well, that's quite hard because there's on the one hand countries that try to tackle these issues by themselves, but because they're global issues, they cannot be tackled by any country by themselves. But at the same time, not every country is always fond about giving some power away. And I don't feel like it's giving power away necessarily when you decide together. But still, like they, for example, want to tackle it at EU level, UN level, WTO level. There's often... The problem is the more countries you include, the more disagreements there are. And that's why often we struggle as an international community to address these issues effectively. Whereas on the other hand, actually, you can achieve so much more with multiple countries. And if you combine all of your resources and if you make sure that your noses are pointed in the same direction, I don't know if you can say that in English too, then you can achieve so much more. So I think there's always a balance to be struck when it comes to dealing with global issues, because countries are always going to be very involved in this if they decide to work together. And then they have to decide, okay, am I going to give some power away, or no, are we going to decide by majority, or am I going to keep my power? We're going to vote with unanimity. But then it's much harder to get things done. Like, you always see this kind of tensions coming up with when countries work together. And that's why sometimes NGOs are also, they don't often have the same decision-making powers as intergovernmental organizations do, or governments do, unfortunately. But at the same time, they are there supposedly for everyone's interest, and it's not about, they don't necessarily vote, they don't have the countries controlling it. So I think there needs to be a balance between the organizations that have governments in them and those that are non-profit and non-governmental, in solving things together through like a network or a system of governance. Yeah.
Okay. And generally, I've seen that, we have all seen that in the past years, the world has generally had probably the most frightening issues to fight with of the, like, not the decade, but the centenary.
Yeah.
Because we have faced the pandemic, and we are now having a war in the heart of Europe.
Yeah. I would say yes, from a European perspective, because I think for some parts of the world it's different.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, in Europe, of course, the pandemic was global, but a lot of people have been saying like, oh, we don't know war in Europe anymore, which is not necessarily true. The EU countries have not been at war since the Second World War, but we've had still wars in the Balkans and in Georgia, for example, and in Ukraine already earlier as well. So, but I think it's still a big shock for a lot of people that it comes so close. And it's definitely, you notice that there's a lot of common crises that the international organizations feel like they need to respond to, like financial crises and the pandemic and another war, which definitely requires some actorness, and it kind of sometimes also shows how hard it is to act together and come together. But yeah, that's definitely, I feel like there has been a lot of those shocks in the past few years. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so now that we have talked about this course, I think it's the best time to talk about artificial intelligence.
Okay, yes.
And I was wondering, I feel like maybe it became more popular last year, and a lot of students started using it. And pretty quickly, university decided that they're gonna use the things to check if it's AI generated. So I was wondering, what do you think about artificial intelligence? Do you think it should be used in education or not? And how do you actually use it?
So I think it's tricky, and it's not like black or white. I don't think it's bad or amazing. I must say, like, once we started hearing about tools like ChatGPT, as teachers, we kind of freaked out because we, for example, just changed our curriculum from having a lot of exams to more assignments and things you need to do and write and work out. And so, for example, if you switch to a paper and then find out that there's this tool that can write papers for the students that that is not easy to detect, at that moment when we realized that, we were like, oh, we're screwed. So we got a bit scared in the beginning, I must say. And also, just even if we put in strict rules, you cannot avoid students from using it. And I also don't want to send like students to the exam board and for them to be, face consequences for this. So you don't just want to have strict rules in place. You also want to prevent it, or at least that was the initial response. Then we found out that AI can be useful to anyone to a certain extent. I think you can get a lot of inspiration. So if you're looking for some sources or what are the general opinions on this, and then based on what AI tells you, you look into it. I think that's not a bad thing to do at all. I think it can give you a lot of inspiration. And now, for example, myself, I'm thinking, wow, when I was doing my master writing papers, writing my dissertation, I wish I had a tool like that. However, I do think it's when you use it, you need to do it very responsibly, because you can never, ever take words from AI and then use it as your own. Like, that's very dangerous with, for example, writing papers. Also not legal, it's against the rules. And also that kind of stops you from doing your own research. I think it can help you to start the research, but it's very problematic to start believing in all of the sources immediately, because quite often if you say, oh, give me 5 sources on this, it makes up 5 sources, for example.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't have newer information than usually 2 years ago. And it doesn't do referencing. So there's a lot of things that are lacking and make it less credible, that require even extra input from you that I'm not expecting from someone who wants AI to write the paper for them because they don't want to do it themselves. So I think AI can be very helpful, even for teachers, also for the students, if you use it for inspiration, finding information, and if you are going to fact check everything and then use it as a basis to do research from. But it's very problematic and dangerous even if you let it do the work for you and if you copy what the tool is saying and the information it's giving you. And I also don't think that students, if you show that you can be replaced by a machine, then who's going to keep you from being replaced by a machine when you're going to do a job, if your job can be done by AI, if you have the same skills as AI, right? So make sure that you also have some skills yourself that the computer doesn't have. So in the end, I think we've been becoming a little bit more at ease with the existence of AI and trying to see it also when we can use it to our disadvantage, when students can use it to our advantage, and when the students can do too. But it's very important to keep in mind the dangers of it and the limits of it, and that you still have your own contribution in there. So that's kind of my take on AI at the moment.
Yes, and I think it's a bit weird that people usually associate AI generally with ChatGPT, when actually artificial intelligence is a bit more than that.
Of course, yeah.
And there are so many other tools that can help you. For example, we were even encouraged to use the Research Rabbit during our classes, which is a tool which helps you to basically find the papers where you can find the answers to the questions that you're looking for.
That sounds good.
So there are definitely some tools that can help you in terms of education. And we had even this really interesting debate this summer about whether it could be easier for teachers, for example, to check on the exams using artificial intelligence. But
well, I don't want to be replaced. But also, I do think that there might be actually quicker ways to do it, because quite often, well, for example, multiple choice exams are already checked by computers, and I'm very glad I don't have to do that by hand. But at the same time, you do see, when I do always check it, and I do always find mistakes, that of course humans make mistakes too, but it still requires a human being to come in and check it, which a computer can check another computer per se. In some cases, yes, it might save me some time. Like, marking is not always a teacher's favorite task, but you always need a human eye. I feel like there's so much nuance to it, especially to open questions, that I'm kind of like, I've heard from people even who teaching more like math kind of courses, that when a computer checks it, it actually takes them more work because they have to double check it, and there's mistakes made that they cannot fix, because it's you can tell a human to change their approach, but it's much harder to tell a robot to do so. So yeah, maybe there are opportunities there, but I feel like you should never fully replace the humans. Also, I don't want to be replaced. So, yeah.
Okay. I also actually wanted to ask you something, because you have mentioned even today earlier a bit that you have also studied in Estonia and Romania. Did you do your exchange in Estonia?
So I did my exchange in Romania at the University of Bucharest during my bachelor in European Studies as well. And then I have some working experience in Estonia, and then I did a master program of 2 years in Estonia. Yeah. And
how was the experience of living for half a year in Romania?
It was my first time living abroad, that I really always wanted to, and I really liked it. It's also not a country that necessarily I thought I would go to at the beginning of my bachelor, but I was very happy that I did. And it was, like Erasmus, everyone knows, it's not just about the courses that you take, but it was already nice to study politics from a Romanian point of view, because everyone has their own point of view. In the Netherlands, it was also very different. And what I also liked is just in general living abroad for the first time, making a lot of friends from other countries. And you notice, and I mean, I'm sure you already know now living abroad, that you learn so much, not just about the country, but also from your friends from other countries and what it's like to move to another country temporarily. So I had a really, really good time living in Bucharest. Yeah. Yeah.
And how was Estonia?
Also really nice. I wanted to specifically study Europe a bit less from a Western-centric view and from a Western European country, and more from, for example, I mean, Estonians would not like it if I call them Eastern, so Northern Eastern European perspective, yes, or Baltic perspective, but also teachers from other countries, and I really like to get a bit of a different perspective on international relations and to compare it as well, and to see how history is talked about there, and how future perspectives are talked about there, and even things about feeling in relation to your country versus to the EU versus feeling like a global citizen. And that was all very, very interesting and different as well. So I really liked to get also another perspective than what I was used to. Yeah.
You have also mentioned having an internship in Brussels. Was it part of the Blue Book traineeship program?
Yeah, so I applied for the Blue Book traineeship, but also directly to a party. And in the end, I don't know if this is still the system nowadays, but if you say that you want to work for a political group, then your application also goes to the parties from your country in that group. So my application arrived in two ways. And then the party asked me, do you want to work for the political group with other trainees, or do you want to work for the party specifically and then work more for members of the European Parliament? I chose the second option because I thought that would be cool to see like how it functions within a political party, and specifically I thought it would be cool to work with MEPs. But at the same time, I think it's also really nice to work at group level, where you see where you have different political parties involved and all your colleagues are from different countries. So I think that's also very nice. So I could have gone for, I applied for both, but eventually I worked for the national delegation of one party. So I didn't do the Blue Book traineeship at group level, but at party level.
And the Blue Book is, I think it's 6 months, right?
Yeah.
And after your internship, you decided that you want to become a lecturer? Or were there some steps?
So I always thought I would be a lecturer in the future, but I thought very far in the future. I thought I'm going to get experience in politics. So for example, at the European Parliament, I'm going to get experience in the field of diplomacy, for example, at the Dutch embassy. And I thought I'm going to work there for 10, 15 years. But these years that I had in my mind, this plan, it kept on being shorter and shorter. And I was like, I can't wait to start teaching. And I kind of realized that I loved studying politics and studying diplomacy, but I didn't want to be part of it. It's a completely different world to participate in politics and participate in diplomacy. I'm not saying that I never want to do anything, especially with European policy. Again, I very much like it, but working for a political party is very different than studying how politics is being done, for example. And I realized that I was mainly focusing on that experience so that I could maybe use it in my teaching, but teaching was what I really wanted. So because of this work experience that I gained, I kind of realized that, yes, this is what I'm interested in, but I want to study it rather than partake in it. And I want to study it so that I can teach it. So I kind of realized by that experience that teaching was what I really wanted to do. But luckily, I can still use some of my working experience in the teaching and refer back to it. So that's a good thing, I think.
Yes, it really is. Yeah. So now it's very connected to my last question for today. You work with a lot of international students because you are teaching a program which is in English, of course. Was it difficult for you in the beginning? And how does this international perspective contribute to the dynamics of the class that you're having? On the discussions on the European political situation and the challenges? And yes, how it's generally the dynamics of the class during lessons.
It was not difficult for me at all. I actually liked it very much. But for me, at least, going abroad, I noticed how important it is to have different perspective on the same issue. And I really love the input also from international students, because I maybe even too often refer to Dutch examples because that's what I can relate to. But then it's really nice to also get examples from students from other countries as well. And I think it changes the dynamics because I think the diverser the class is, the better it functions in terms of participation, different ideas, group work, that it becomes more diverse. And I think it pushes you much more to come out of your comfort zone. So I think in general it has a very positive impact on the dynamics of the class and on the debate that we have in class. And I feel like the more countries, the better, basically. Yeah. So very good impact.
Yes, I really love how our university and program generally really supports international students. I have never felt like I'm left out as not being Dutch in classes and even outside. I really enjoyed last year. We had the intercultural fair, which I also got to participate in. So it was really fun. There are a lot of activities for you to actually feel united in diversity.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I think that's the best way of ending this podcast. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure, and I'm sure that this will be a nice head start for maybe students that are planning to come to the Netherlands.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yes, so for those who are listening to us right now, don't forget to follow the activities of other members of the Our Voice, Our Future campaign. And yes, that's pretty much it. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.